morning. Hey, thanks for sticking it out through the very bitter end to the last day. I really appreciate the readership here quite a bit. You guys are fantastic. You're such a warm and engaging audience. We really appreciate it. So I just wanted to let you know how much you bring to the festival for us. Matt, so that's the clock. So, okay, so I just want to keep in mind.
We're already down a minute.
We're really fortunate to have Matt Gutman here. I don't know how many of you see him as a really familiar face. He's been on your screen for years. He got his start actually writing. So it's appropriate that he's here at a writers' festival. And he tells me that his first editor is somebody who's given a talk in the other room.
So Brett Stevens, who with the Times is my first editor. He was a child editor at the Jerusalem Post. I think he was hired at the age of 28. And I was 24 or 23 or something like that. Everybody, yeah. And they basically allowed me to do anything I wanted to do, which was great and terrible at the same time. A funny thing about Brett, he said, Matt, you know, you're a mediocre writer, but you are just the most excellent reporter I've ever met. Hasn't changed, but...
So in 2018, the whole world was transfixed by this drama that was unfolding on the other side of the world. And I remember Jamie calling and asking me, will you do this interview with Matt? I said, well, why me, Jamie? He says, because you're Thai. I said, actually,
no.
Jamie, I'm not Thai, but I was a boy once. And I've heard of soccer. So okay, 2 out of 3. It's right down my alley, so I got to do this.
He's also like the Renaissance man of the Palm Desert area. Yeah. This guy can do anything. He is so incredibly researched and well-read.
Oh, thank you.
He watched every single movie and read multiple books just about this, and this is one of 7 talks he's done.
So I apologize. If you're a patient of mine and I haven't returned your calls, you know it was for a good reason. So Matt and I thought that rather than just talking about this, we were going to do something which is a little different for this. And Matt actually took the time and prepared this PowerPoint presentation so that we have this.
Let's see. Let's see if it holds up.
So here's what that was the book. And we actually have a hard time seeing the screen. So we want to turn our chairs a little bit.
Sure, I can sort of make out enough to know it.
Okay. So these look like boys, but they're wild boars.
Mupas.
Yeah.
The Mupas was the name of the team, and it was Saturday, the day they went into the cave, and it was just a regular day. They had a game in the morning, and one of the things that they did is do team activities afterwards. And so on this day, not everybody joined, but most of the kids went out for a bike ride, and they were going to go to the local big cave, which is not very far away, super accessible, and check it out and hike inside. Now, I think the next slide, yes. What does that say? What does that say? And what is the cave flooding? Is it like July? It's phrased funny, right? Was it cave flooding season?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cave is flooding season. So this was like the 29th of June. So it wasn't quite yet cave flooding season, but pretty darn close.
So, when I was looking through these slides and kind of moving things around, my wife Susan said, did that sign get put there after 2018? No. Because that would have been a natural question. Well, after this disaster, right? But this was well known.
And it was a pretty regular thing. And kids would go into the cave. And one of the beautiful things about Mae Sai, which is this little town in Thailand where they're all from, snug up against the Myanmar border, is the community. And having spent a bunch of time there, everybody's super close. They all know each other. They spend time together in a way that we would really like our children to do with, the soccer coach. It's super communal. And so when they went in there, it was one of the boys' birthdays. I believe it was Knight's 16th birthday. Mm-hmm. And I looked to him as a reference because he's just recently read the book. And he had to be out at a certain time. And so they go in, and as they're in the cave, it was already raining, but a monsoon starts to descend on this corner of Thailand. And they didn't know it, but it was a bad one. And it kept raining and raining and raining. And they went pretty far into the cave. And so the initial antechambers are huge, like twice as big as a hangar for 747s. Like, you go in there, you're like, how is this possible? And each chamber, the farther you go in through these little tunnels, gets smaller and smaller. And so they managed to get over 1.5 miles in.
Yeah.
And they turn to go back because Knight's got to go to his 16th birthday. His mom's cooking his favorite meal.
Let me just, you can point out that this is where in Thailand we are, just, right on the border with Myanmar. And I think this is a picture from your book that shows the chambers that he's describing. So
I'll just jump down. All right, so since we're here.
That's why he wore those shoes, by the way.
So like these chambers are huge. You can see like, where's chamber 1? It's over 100 feet high, right? And so they're crawling through here, and it's really cool, and everybody's having a great time. And they get to around here, actually maybe here, and they turn to go back because they've had enough time. And this is the famous T-junction, and it's flooded. And they're seeing the water rise and rise and rise.
This one shows what that flooding means. Because you're looking at this map and you're kind of thinking that it's like on the same level, but it's not. It's ups and downs, right? So when it floods, you get trapped.
And they realized that they couldn't go through it. And they were not strong swimmers. And they tried to tie a rope around one of the kids and have him go in. The coach tried to dive in. And they realized they were stuck. The thing is, you're about 1,000, half a mile. So, 1,500 feet, do the math, whatever it is, 2,000 feet down. Yeah, 2,000 feet down, 2,500 feet down. No radio signal, no cell phone signal, literally nothing. You are as remote here, where they were, as more remote there than you would be on the moon. Because in the moon, you have radio signals. But literally nothing penetrates into this part of the earth. So they were cut off in every possible way from civilization, and nobody knew where they were. So the hours start ticking by, and it turned out that some of the kids in that initial picture with the bikes didn't end up going. And so word trickled out that they had gone to the cave. And the parents start to see the hours roll by. Knight doesn't show up. This is the name of this boy. Doesn't show up for his birthday party. And the parents start to congregate at the cave. And it's pouring. And they're slipping around. They're trying to go in. The head coach of this team almost breaks his back falling in that first big chamber, trying to go down the stairs. It's absolute mayhem. And so this snowball effect of the emergency starts to progress. And the local police get called. Then the local governor gets called. Then the government gets called. And within like 36 hours, the prime minister is on the case. They're sending the Thai Navy SEALs. And within 48 hours, they know they've got 13 kids in there. And the U.S. Special Forces, the air TAC people who are based in Okinawa, are already alerted. And it becomes this international story.
So this is like some of the rescuers just showing up in the cave that you have, and here are
and that's an interesting
parents.
image, because so what this is an offering. A city was created, a very large village was created right outside the mouth of the cave within days. There was laundry, there was food, everything to help the divers and the rescuers. And it was thousands of people. There was trash pickup, anything you wanted to do could get done there. But one of the most heartbreaking things was
I think the offerings are because of the legend of the mountain, right? The sleeping princess.
So it's, and in general, they're a very religious community, a faithful community, and they thought that the deities would help them. And there is a legend about this mountain. Go forward. Can we see what it looks like? Do you see the contours of the mountain? Is that the next slide?
No, but that was back.
It's called. So the cave is called the Cave of the Sleeping Princess.
Yeah.
And no, I think it's forward. Go forward one. Let's see if we can see the mountain.
I don't think so.
No, that's Vern.
Vern, yeah.
So if you look at the profile of a mountain,
the princess has really changed in appearance over the years.
The years have not been kind. Go forward one. Let's just see. Forget Vern. Go forward. Let's just see.
No, we don't have. It's not the contour. I mean, we have the contour.
There was
when we do the water control. There's a little bit of the contour there.
So it's called the Cave of the Sleeping Princess. And the reason it is because it looks like a pregnant princess or a pregnant woman. If you look at the profile of the mountain, it looks like a pregnant woman lying in repose on her back. And the reason for that is the legend is that there was a gorgeous princess, she's always beautiful, isn't she, who married, was it the stable boy?
She marries down.
She marries down, big time down.
Which is a trend now. You'll hear about in other talks, you know. But back then it wasn't a thing.
The Papa King did not approve. You know, stable boy and beautiful princess run off into the wilderness and they find this cave. And
he knocks her up.
He knocks her up.
Yeah.
I was trying to keep it PG rated, but you know, Khoi
in California,
here,
it's okay.
He knocks her up. He's out foraging for food one day. The king's guards find him. They murder him. And they go in and they inform her, and she realizes it, and she stabs herself in the abdomen, killing herself and the unborn child. And what flows from her is the river that comes out of the center of the cave. Pretty tragic. And so this is one of the, so they were offering, these are offerings by the parents who have no idea what's going on and are terrified and haven't heard from their children in many, many days now. And many people presume that they're dead because the cave is completely flooded. And when we talk about the first people to try to come in the cave, the current flowing out of it was so powerful that if you were wearing a scuba mask, it would rip it right off your face. Yeah. It was impossible to swim against the current if you could swim. And they were just grabbing stuff. The visibility is zero. And rescue seemed absolutely impossible. Is this video or is this still here?
Well, this is
I think it's
Vern. I think there.
Go.
You had mentioned three. In your book, it's like 3 miracles of coincidence, and Vern is the first one. You want to talk a little bit Vern now? We can go right on to the current and come back to Vern.
Sure. So Vernon Unsworth, who ended up having a big legal scrap with Elon Musk a couple of years later, you might remember, happened to be the guy who knew the cave best. And he's a British guy who lives there half the year, and he happened to be there, and he happened to be available. And he's the guy who actually mapped out the cave. And it's not that common in Thailand for people to have such granular understanding of a cave like this. And he happened to have this cave be one of his great passions and had been throughout the entirety of it, obviously not when it was flooded. And he became seminal. He's not a diver, but he's a spelunker. And he became absolutely seminal in assembling the team and also telling people exactly what the cave looked like and what to expect inside. And he's the person who ended up calling this group of dorky British cave divers. Okay, so diving, scuba diving is a pretty common sport, right, activity? Yeah. Cave diving is less so, right? I'm sure, who's got a scuba license here? Anybody have, yeah. Anybody ever dive in a cave? No. Yeah. So
here's the water. Speaking of diving cave, so this is. Whoops. Can we play?
I don't think you can.
I asked before if we could play video, and
when I looked at it the other day, it didn't look. Anyway, so
is it? Yeah, here we go. Thank you.
Oh, okay, it does play.
So it's like white water in the cave, and
they've got to swim under those rocks. Basically, there's a hole under those rocks through which they have to get into, and they couldn't, and nobody could do it. But Vernon Unsworth happened to know a couple of guys. And so, you know, scuba diving, cave diving, expert cave diving, cave dive rescuing, which is like the niche of the niche of the niche. And there are just literally a couple of people in the world who are the best cave dive rescuers.
And these are not them.
These are the Thai Navy SEALs. And these are not what you would consider your typical superheroes, right? You think like, G.I. Joe, like Navy SEAL types. No, these are like tall, skinny, nerdy British guys who wear black sandals with white socks and are really awkward and like shake your hand, and they're like totally weird dudes who I love, but they're like a very unique group. However, they have the one skill set in the world that could be able to rescue these boys. And it's only 2 people. There are 4 people who were possibly able to do it, but the 2 were the only ones who would be able to break through. Vernon Unsworth knows them, calls them up, Jim Stanton and John Valanthan, and he's like, guys, I need you here. And so they start to assemble a team, and they quickly get over to Thailand as quickly as possible.
These are the, I don't know if you want to point out.
Just keep rolling. I
Sam
don't
and
think we need to
Gutman.
go.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's coming up.
He's on the corner, but okay, here we go.
Isn't there a full picture
This
of it?
was the, so you had talked about the chronology, like the Navy SEALs arrive, the Thai SEALs, and they're trying to help, and then this is the American Air Force.
So by the
lands
within
there
a
to
few
help.
days, the U.S. 353rd Air TAC team arrives. This was a special call from the Thai government.
They're in Japan.
They're in Japan, in Okinawa, and so it's not so far. But these guys don't have the diving skills necessary to get in. What they do have is the 353rd is known as like the Swiss Army knives of the Air Force. Their job is to rescue people and to solve problems. And so they get to Mae Sai, Thailand, and what they see is a giant mess, right? There are people from like 30 countries. There are Israelis and Belgians and Finns and Brits and Aussies and Americans and Thais and the Thai Navy SEALs, and everybody's doing something else. There's a group of people led by an American restaurateur and water expert who's actually a genius named Tanet Natisri, who has started to figure out ways to pump water out of the cave. He's also gone up to the top of the mountain to try to find a way down into the cave from the top, or to drill down. So they're trying to find new ways to get in, pump water out, or to get divers in.
We've got a really nice graphic of that you had put in. So we'll, but you wanted a slide with mud. So here, because I think that's what you remember from when you landed there, is how much mud there was.
Yeah.
And so this is a picture just to show you mud, how much,
It
because it was
rained a
raining
lot.
so hard, right?
It was pretty dreary.
Yeah. And
Okay, there you
here's-
go.
yeah.
There's the sleeping princess. Do you see that?
Yeah. And
I knew we had that slide there.
So if we can play the video on this, it's just like a minute or two, but it shows you what Tanet was trying to do. And if you can turn the sound up a little bit on it.
They took little mopeds and 4x4s into the mountains.
เพราะว่าถ้าเกิดเราหยุดน้ำที่ไหลจากข้างบนได้เนี่ยก็คือเราไม่ได้ง่ายในการว่าในกรณีที่ฝนมามันก็จะติดข้างในใช่ไหมครับแล้วเราดีต้องการเวลาที่เติมถ้าฝนมาใส่การก่อนทำว่าเนี่ยน้ำมันจะขึ้นน้ำเยอะมากก็คือตัวนี้แล้วก็ตัวนี้แต่ว่าปัจจุบันเนี่ยเรามีกำลังที่จะตรวจตัวนี้ได้ครับ
So there was a creek that you're seeing that they believed fed a lot of the water into the cave that was causing it to flood. And you saw those big pumps?
Yeah.
They pumped 1 billion gallons of water out of the cave during the 2 weeks that this lasted. And Tanet, he owns a Thai restaurant. And was it Indiana?
That's right.
Is it-
No, Michigan.
Michigan.
Southern Michigan.
Yeah.
That's him at the end.
And he happens to be a water expert.
So I think he's miracle number 2. Like Vern,
Probably.
who knows the cave and has the only one who's mapped it, living right nearby and getting on the scene within a couple days is miracle number 1.
There were a number of miracles. There were so many.
Tanet is like this water expert who lives in America most time. He's back helping his father-in-law, and he's got English skills and Thai.
And he was able to
Yeah.
sort of connect the Thais and the foreigners. Also, the key was that you couldn't dive. They didn't know at this point if the boys were alive or dead. They assumed that they were dead. And so a week in, people were thinking about a recovery mission rather than a rescue mission. Because even if they had survived drowning, they would have starved to death. It's pitch black. Now, I want to tell you something that happens in the absolute silence of a cave. People begin, grown-ups, expert spelunkers and cavers, begin to hallucinate, because the absolute quiet and stillness and dark makes your mind fill the vacuum. And so crazy, weird things happen to people, and they hallucinate, they hear things, they believe things. It is unbelievably stressful on the system. You think it would be relaxing, it's the exact opposite, because our brain cannot handle that void. So everybody thought they'd lost their mind, drowned, died of hunger, disease, rockfall. There was no reason that they should have been alive. And they didn't know. So Tanet's job was to keep the water was to try to minimize the amount of water that was rushing into the cave to allow rescuers, or at least explorers, to try to get to the back ends of the cave where they believed the boys might be.
This is so I think what I didn't realize to read your book is that these mountains are almost like porous. They're like sponges with these tunnels, right? So that the water control was twofold. One is you just like dig in the bottom and you try to drain water out to like pull water out of the sponge. And then the top were these sinkholes where water would rush into the cave, and so they were trying to divert the water from going in. So that was the twofold part. If we could play this video, it's just like these attempts early on to send divers in, and you can see what they're trying to do.
And so by July...
And they're laying these guidelines, which are really critically important.
Right, so you don't know where you're going, you can't see where you're going, and the only way to know where you came from is to lay guideline. So they put down the string, and because you can't see, you're going along the string.
So here you're tall, thin, nerdy guys. Here's Valentin and Stanton.
On the left and Stanton on the right. And Stanton has something called a cockwomble. Anybody know what a cockwomble is? He did have an accent. He had improvised most of his own gear. He was such an expert and this is the power of nerds. I tell my kids, nerds rule the world, Ben. And
where were you when I was growing up?
I know. Beating up on the nerds.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. We're getting our revenge now.
Yeah, I know. And so he devised his own stuff, and he's got his own inflatable, so you need buoyancy. And he basically had a car inner tube, or like a small, like a motorcycle inner tube that was easy to get in and out of tight spaces, and he called it a cockwomble. And so he's got this own gear that he's improvised. Valentin's with him, and they're the best in the world, even though they're not the biggest, the most athletic. They just know how to do it, and they do not get scared. They never lose their cool. So the first day they go in,
and sorry, Matt, your book explained to me, and I never realized this before, that the scuba gear is different for cave than open water. You know, we've all seen like James Bond movies or whatever, or Jacques Cousteau, and they've always got the tanks on their backs, and
these guys take their tanks off. They're on the side because you're going through spaces that are like as wide as this table here.
I think the narrowest space was, they say, smaller than a garbage can, right? So it's about, I think, was 9 by 27 inches. So I was going to get a poster board and cut out 9 by 27 and put it at the door. You had to go through this to get into. But then I thought maybe that would cut down on our attendance. Yeah.
The line out the door would have been a bit of a.
But it would give people an appreciation of what we were going through here.
Yeah, I mean it's. No, honestly, I mean I think
we'll do that at the London room. How the hell would that?
It would have been pretty much not that much bigger than this opening. So to get through a lot of these openings, you have to take off your scuba gear and go through and then haul it in, right? So they're constantly moving and changing up their configuration. So it's really hard to go in.
Yeah.
And the first day they try to just assess the water, which is on the 29th or something. So it's July 29th or July 1st maybe. They go into the third chamber and they dive, 50 feet down, and they go up and down, and it's underwater, and they come up, and there are these 3 Thai pump workers there. They're like, what are you doing here? They're like, we're stranded.
They were workers who were taking a nap, and the water rose, and then they got stranded. And they weren't divers. They because the water was low enough that you could walk in, and it was just under your neck. And then they sent an evacuation, and people, well, you know, they were sleeping.
Because nothing works in a cave.
And it's kind of dark, and so these guys woke up, and it's like, you're sleeping on the job. You know, that's...
You snooze, you lose your life.
Yeah.
So Jim and John find these guys. They're like, what are you doing here? They're like, anyway. And so they realize that the first day, trying to just swim as far as they can't go any farther because they've got to rescue these guys. So each one of them, they have an extra regulator. If you scuba dive, you know you have like another thing that you breathe on. And so they try to dive with them with the regulator underneath the cavern to the other side.
Big language barrier too, by the way, right? So they can't really communicate to these guys to know what to expect.
But something critical happens. I think it was the last guy or the second guy freaks out, right? Because it's pitch black, the water's cold, you can't see, and your entire being depends on this thing that this guy's giving you to breathe, and the panic reflex sets in. I mean, I would panic. Everybody, it's like, so he starts freaking out, and one of the things that they teach you is that when people freak out underwater, they could kill you. So you're supposed to separate from them because you need to be able to survive yourself. These guys didn't do it because they're so good and so professional that they figured out a way to like get this guy through. But it left them thinking that this was a 50-foot section, a short section. They would have to bring the boys out over a 2.5-mile section. And these are children who don't know how to swim well, if at all. How are they going to be able to do this with these kids if these guys panicked in 50 feet? And it puts something in their head that they can't get out. And increasingly, day after day, these two experts, Jim Stanton and John Valampton, become increasingly pessimistic, A, about finding the boys alive, because there's no way, and two, about getting them out. Like, how could they get them out alive? It is not technically possible. You can't teach weak, sick kids how to scuba dive 2.5 miles and have them not freak out. Keep that in mind.
So this was cool, Matt, because at the bottom, so I don't know if you can see it here because of the glare, but the bottom picture on the left is a woman with Rick, and this is like the third coincidence. That woman's name is Amp, and she's his girlfriend, and she lives right there. So she kind of like reaches out to Rick and says, hey, you need to be over here. There's like this situation going on. So it's amazing. You got Vern, you got Tenet, and then you've got Amp, like right, all these people right there, critical people.
Yeah.
And so she was like a translator for him and made him aware of this. So we're jumping ahead here, but this is obviously the famous video that kind of rocked the world, really.
I think it's a perfect place to stop. Hold on, don't do the video just yet. So
okay.
So next day, the two leaders, the two good divers who can actually make it through, Jim Stanton and John Valampton, they go in, and it takes them 6 hours to get to the back of the cave. 6 hours of constant hard work fighting the current. And they're literally the only people in the world who have the expertise to be able to do this, and they happen to be there. They didn't think they would make it, and they didn't know where they were going, and they didn't know how far they had to go. So at one point, they surface, because it's a lot of, you're going underwater and diving and pulling and grabbing in rocks, and there's zero visibility. Then the water kind of brings you up, the surface rises, and you end up walking a bit. And you're walking through caves and caverns, and then you go back down in the water, and sometimes you're just walking through because it's chest high, and other times you're actually swimming because it's so deep, and there's space overhead that you don't need to dive. And so they had come to this chamber, surface, to be able to swim, and as soon as his nose hit the water, Jim said to John, John, you smell that? And he smelled it, and it smelled like death. It smelled like human decay. And their immediate thought was, well, we found them, but they're dead. And then upon second sniff, wow, it really smells like shit.
Yeah.
And so they keep going until they hear some sounds, some chatter. because they have lights on their helmets and they're casting light and they look like these aliens who've surfaced from the gloom. And then this interaction happens, captured on GoPro camera. Oh, do we have audio?
I think we do, but it's just not.
How many are you? And then there's one kid who spoke English. And so he wants to go home. Are you going to get us to go home today? And he says, not today.
But it's
Many people are coming. Pause it for a sec.
Yeah.
He was lying.
Yeah.
He knew it because he knew nobody could get to them.
And you know that when they're diving, they're not just diving. They're diving. They're holding a spool because one of the big things, it's like they're like climbing a mountain and you're rappelling and you're laying lines, right? And so it's not just a blind dive. You blind with this spool and then you tie it and then you go further. And it's called laying line. And they were right at the end of their extension line when they found them.
That was like as far as they could go. Anyway, so they found them and lied to them immediately because these kids want to go home now. Are you going to go home? Not today. Many people are coming, and they know that many people can't get in there, and they know that spot can't sustain many people. It's just a small, muddy patch with a rise. And
this is 10 days after the boys have disappeared.
So they're incredibly skinny and gaunt, but they're alive, and they're in good spirits, and they're able to talk, right? They're not completely destroyed physically, which is shocking. We were talking about this at breakfast. The coach Ek is his name, led them through meditation and really kept their spirits up. He also made them dig a trench in the far reach of this beach area where they were so they could do their business. Because think about it, they were living and drinking and sleeping right in the same area where all their other needs had to be met, which is why the smell and the stench was so distinct and so appalling.
They had no food, but they had fresh water and they had air. That's
fresh-ish water,
Yeah, because
and
the water
enough
coming
air.
down from,
But that would change because actually the next day, 4 Thai Navy SEALs came with more food. And they were trying to beef up their food supplies with MREs, which the U.S. 353rd had flown in from Okinawa. They'd given them their own and had more brought in. Now, I know we only have about 12 minutes, so I'm going to start cutting to the chase here.
Yeah, this is the Thai SEALs coming.
So they brought them thermal blankets, a little bit of food, and what happens when kids start eating food? They got to go potty. And so now you have 4 Thai Navy SEALs who are big grown men, plus the 13 kids and the coach, all eating MREs. A meal ready to eat. It's a military ration.
These are from the U.S. Forces.
And what they're also doing is, what else do you do? Breathing. And it's a confined area. And when you're breathing confined area, we breathe in 21% oxygen, and we exhale several percent less than that. And so they were degrading the level of oxygen. The air, obviously, it was still air, but the air had less oxygen each and every day. And so the U.S. sent in this, what was it called? A machine that basically measured the oxygen, the air quality.
An oxygen air quality measurer.
Says the doctor. There's a word for it, I can't remember what it was. But when it comes from him, you're like, oh yeah, that's right, that's right. Yes, sir. And they realize it's only 15%, which is the equivalent of like, 10,000 feet. So, and there was another central problem. All the divers think there's no way that these are the best divers in the world who've been training for 30 years to be able to do this very dive, which is the most challenging they've ever done.
And this is a triathlete here, a Navy SEAL, a retired Navy SEAL.
Who died halfway through. Who couldn't even, he was transferring tanks from one side to another, and he died because it is so very complex. And it was tragic and very chilling for the rest of the divers, really reminding them how difficult and dangerous this is. So we have 13 sick kids and a coach who are going to be able to do the dive that the Thai Navy SEAL triathlete died doing, part of a way, and that, you know, only the best in the world can do, there's no way they're coming out alive.
This was like the big meeting, Matt, that you write about. It's a really important one to try to figure out, like, what is our plan now?
These boys had become national treasures. They were world famous now. The whole world knew about the Mupas. And the government of Thailand had promised the parents, the public, the international community that there would be 0 casualties, that every single one of these boys would come out alive. And so what the Thai government had hoped to do was have the boys come out the same way they'd gone in, walking, right? They walked in, we'll wait for the monsoon season to end, they'll walk out. But these boys couldn't wait 3 to 4 months. Some of them already were showing signs of chest infections. There was the issue of rising water, because you didn't know how the water would fluctuate during the monsoon. There was the resupply issue. It was extraordinarily hard just to get them any bit of food. And of course, the contamination and disease from them living in their own filth.
And like us, Matt, they were running out of time.
They were running. I feel as stressed as those divers were. This is life and death right now.
Hold your breath, folks. So they had a plan.
So they had a plan. Well, they had a plan, but they didn't quite know how to reveal it to the Thai government because the plan called for most of the kids probably to die on the way out. There was only one way to get them out, diving them out. The kids don't dive. You'd have to, the only way you could do it, said the divers who had tried to rescue those first guys. Remember that first day that they'd gone in there and the guy freaked out? So he realized the only way I could do it is if I'm carrying inert bodies. Kids who are either so knocked out that you could, you know, amputate an arm and they wouldn't know it. They can't be twitching. They can't be flailing. We're not talking about sedation. We're talking about being completely unconscious.
Yeah.
And the Thai government did not like that. And so they'd been working on trying to get this plan through for a couple of days. Finally, the Thai government sits down and has this conversation with them. And they ask Major Charlie Hodges, who was the leader of the American group that was doing the planning, not the actual diving, but they were organizing everybody. They were good at corralling resources and getting people where they needed to go. And the Thai Interior Minister asks Charlie Hodges, he's like, well, what do you consider a success? He said, sir, if we get one child out alive to their parents, that's a success. But these kids are going to have to come out no matter what. And they're going to have to be extricated if they're alive or if they're dead, because we have to repatriate the bodies to their parents.
So I love the
We've got to get them back.
The American approach to organization here. You know, in the movies, you don't see much about the Americans because it's the British divers, it's the Americans provided the organizational thing. And this is a, so you couldn't have a regular mask, right? And a regulator because these kids were knocked out. So you had to have a special full face mask that would breathe. And this is
positive pressure mask. So this is called an aga. Is that an aga? But anyway, you see them.
And that's the
it's
mask.
a positive. So it's constantly. So when who scuba dives, right? Raise hands. What do? How do you get the air? Breathe in. But if you're unconscious, you can't stimulate that. So it's an unconscious breathing. So a positive pressure mask basically pumps oxygen or air into your face, right? And it's a full face mask, and they would have to have tightened it super hard to make sure that they're still breathing. But this is a 3-hour journey out.
So, but they're practicing.
How do you make sure that these kids don't die if a little water leaks in because it's pitch black? There'll be almost no way to know. So even though this was a genius idea, and the U.S. brought all of these, they brought like every one of these masks they could find in the world, flew them in. They didn't know if it would work. They knew they would get the bodies back.
All the masks in the world, there was 4.
That could fit the kids.
And they practiced in a pool with some local kids, and it was an act of incredible bravery, not just the dive, but of the Thai governor who took the hit and said, "I'll approve it. If it goes down wrong, I'll take the blame." Which that is like, in today's age, someone to take responsibility like that. I'm going to just zip through. This is just a guy practicing in the pool, and this is the U.S. government.
So they sort of mapped it out. The water bottles connote the scuba tanks. They'd be constantly changing tanks because they're going through air like crazy. And so they call, okay, so remember how I said cave diving is the niche of a niche of a niche, and cave dive rescue is niche, niche, niche. So there's one guy in the world, who is a cave dive rescuing doctor who's an anesthesiologist. One! He happened to be in Australia. His name is Harry Harris, right? Richard Harris. And he's part of a cave diving group called the Wet Mules.
Yeah.
And he gets the call. He's actually excited about it. He ends up coming, but he doesn't know if he's going to do this or not because he thinks they're all going to die. He's like, there's no way this is going to work. They're all going to die, and it's going to be on me. I'm going to lose my license, and this is my reputation. I've killed children. Also, there's no informed consent. The parents don't know this is happening. They've not been told anything.
Nobody knows this is happening, and this is basically it's 5. The sump is the part that's underwater, and so there are these breaks or these chambers above, and then the 5 sump. This is kind of a diagram, and so they had spent all the time staging by putting extra tanks in all the chambers, and then you would have extra people at the sump to help portage the kids over, and then you dive again. And
Doctor, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
You ever use ketamine on a patient?
When we do deep sedation, we've got respiratory technician, you got a nurse, you got a doctor, you have all these you have to monitor vital signs continuously. The idea of sedating someone deeply and then zip tying their hands behind their back, zip tying their ankles together, putting them face down in the water, and you're diving.
In a taco wrapped around the air canister.
And you have no idea what their vital signs are. I would lose my license, and I think this was a concern of Dr. Harris. Like, what if I kill somebody, am I going to jail in Thailand, right? This is, right? Because there's no, as you said, there's no consent.
The whole thing is absolutely bonkers. And so they're not sedating them. They're knocking these kids into next Tuesday. Ketamine is the most commonly administered pediatric anesthesia in the world. So it's super common, which is why he chose it. But it's also super fast acting. And its half-life is super quick. So within half an hour, he expected these kids to start coming awake. So he's got these divers who have no medical experience, and he gives them a pouch full of syringes with ketamine. And he's like, if the kids start stirring, just jab them. And these guys are like...
They're practicing on plastic water bottles
That
the
was
night
the
before.
first time they'd ever given an injection was on a plastic water bottle. And then the next day they're going to have to do it on a young boy, in the dark, in the water, in a cave, 1.5 miles into the ground. And they'd never done it before. And so the first guy who does it is Jason Mallinson, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to act it out. So we only have 2 minutes. So Mallison's pumping along in the cave, and suddenly his kid starts twitching. And he's like, oh, shit. He keeps going, the kid's still twitching. He's like, oh, no. So you're also floating. All your stuff is floating. So he kind of goes to the wall, pins the kid up on the wall. Jason Mallinson is smaller than I am. He's this tiny guy. And so he's got a pouch in his front with the sedation. So he starts fishing into the pouch, and suddenly the stuff starts floating away. So he's like, no! He grabs, and I interviewed him like a few days. It was crazy. He starts grabbing the stuff. He's got part of it in his mouth. Somehow he gets the syringe to work. He jabs the kid with the syringe, and finally it's very fast acting. Within 5 seconds, when it's intramuscular, the kid's out. The kid passes out. It's like, okay. Yeah. He keeps going, and he had to do it again and again. And so these people who'd never administered any medicine were administering ketamine to these kids in the pitch black, in the cave, in the water, and somehow all of these kids survived.
So
it is like I'm just reviewing it because I haven't really gone over the stuff until
now we got
Khoi asked me to for years, and I'm just like, I cannot believe that this happened.
That was the profile. These are the kids when they're getting portaged. They're in the sleds. I'm going to zip through here, Matt, because we're going to be flooded here in a sec. And
they all survived, and here's what happened. So one of the reasons they had to do the operation when they did is because there was another massive storm coming. And I kid you not.
It's coming in 25 seconds.
Yeah. She's very punctual. In TV, we don't, people say go, I don't go. There was a massive monsoon, and literally, like, right after they got the last kid out and started pulling all the ropes out, because it's much more complicated to get the tacos, the human tacos, out. The cave exploded in water again, completely flooding. And if they hadn't gotten those kids out then, it's pretty clear that they would have died at some point, either in the coming days or afterwards. And
Yeah,
they got medals. They got knighted.
They got the George medal. Yeah.
Knighted.
Yeah. Thanks.